Welcome back. uh, this is Terror Tuesdays. It has been a while since we have been here. The last time this happened was on Mother's Day, I believe. But I hope you all enjoy this. It is time for some good stories. Starting off, we have in science, history, and military, the Russian sleep experiment. I wanted to start off by saying, welcome back to Nightmind, but I am not Nightmind. Just Bea. So, the Russian sleep experiment. Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake so the gas didn't kill them. Since it was toxic in high concentrations, this was before CCTV cameras, so they had only microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books, cots to sleep on, but no bedding, running water, and toilet. Enough dried food to last all 5 for over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during World War II. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained, having been promised, falsely, that they would be freed if they submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their pasts. And the general tone of their conversations took on a darker aspect after the 4-day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that led them to where they were, and started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other, and began alternatively whispering to the microphones in one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects in captivity with them. At first, the researchers suspected this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber repeatedly, yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. He continued attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behavior is how the other captives reacted to it. Or rather, didn't react to it. They continued whispering to the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The 2 non-screaming captives took the books apart, smeared page after page with their own feces, and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped. So did the whisperings to the microphones. After 3 more days passed, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were working, since they thought it impossible that no sound could be coming with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at a very heavy level of strenuous exercise. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something they said they would not do to get the reaction from the captives. They used the intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the captives. They were afraid they were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor, or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." To their surprise, they heard a single phrase in a calm voice response. We no longer want to be freed. Debate broke out among the researchers and the military forces funding the research. Unable to provoke any more response using the intercom, it was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air immediately. Voices from the microphones began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for the life of loved ones, to turn the gas back on. The chamber was opened, and soldiers sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although no one could rightly call the state that any of them in as life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subjects' thighs and chests stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking the drain and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of the water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth, as the researchers initially thought. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the rib cage of all 4 test subjects had been removed, while the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remained in place. The skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the rib cage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all 4 could be seen to be working, digesting food. It quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that they had ripped off and eaten over the course of days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. They continued to scream to be left in the chamber, and alternatively begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on, lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out. Another was gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another 5 of the soldiers lost their lives if you count ones that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen ruptured and he bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times a human dose of a morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arm of one doctor. One heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out, to the point there was no more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach and just repeating the words, "More!" over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility. The 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begged for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had. In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back within his body, it was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative they had given him to prepare him for the surgery. He fought furiously against his restraints. When the anesthetic gas was brought out to put him under, He managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even though the weight of a 200-pound soldier holding that wrist as well. It took only a little more anesthetic than normal to put him under. And the instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had tripled the normal level of oxygen. His muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be subdued. Most of them were from the force of his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords destroyed, he was unable to beg or object to surgery. He only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval. When the anesthetic gas was brought near him, he shook his head yes when someone suggested, reluctantly. They tried the surgery without anesthetic and did not reach for the entire 6-hour procedure of his replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon presiding stated repeatedly that it should be medically possible for the patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetching to the patient so that the patient could write his message. It was simple. Keep cutting. The other 2 test subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthetic as well. Although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation, the surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patient laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subjects could only follow the attending researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their system in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was given. I must stay awake. All 3 subjects' restraints were reinforced, and they were placed back into the chamber awaiting determination as to what should be done with them. The researchers, facing the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed the stated goals of their projects, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, an ex-KGB, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected, but were overruled. In preparation for being sealed in the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all 3 stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back on the gas. It was obvious that at this point, all 3 were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. One of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds until all of his might, first left, then right, then left again, for something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to be wired for EEG, most of the researchers were monitoring his brainwaves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but something flatlined inexplicably. It looked as if he were repeatedly suffering brain death before returning to normal. As they focused on paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut at the same moment his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of deep sleep, then flatlined for the last time as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brainwaves showed the same flat lines as one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside, as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. He pointed his gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to the bed as the remaining members of the medical and research team fled the room. "I won't be locked in here with these things. Not with you!" he screamed at the man strapped to the table. "What are you?" he damned. I must know." The subject smiled. "Have you forgotten so easily?" the subject asked. "We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." The researcher paused, then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out, "So nearly free." And that was the Russian sleep experiment. The original author was written as unknown. But honestly, I got goosebumps just reading that. Um, while we have this small intermission as I pull up my second story, I would like to welcome you all. At least the ones that have talked in chat. Welcome, Panini. Welcome, Bumblebee Pudding. Oso and Mama. This is a different stream than what you're normally used to, a base stream. But you know what? This is the kind of streams I do enjoy as well, especially at these times of night when I am looking for something to just sit back and listen to. And my second and last story for this quick Terror Tuesday is from the SCP Foundation. Now, I myself am not familiar with the SCP Foundation. I was told that delving too deep into the SCP Foundation is quite dangerous, as the things that you uncover are that become slowly and increasingly ingrained to your mind. And welcome, Inti. But due to this being from SCP, I find it fitting that I would add this. So, this is document recovered from the Marianas Trench. I need to write this down because I forget things sometimes, and I think what I heard today was important. Not to me. The time for me or almost anyone else alive on Earth today to make a difference has passed. But someone, somewhere, might be able to make something of this, or at least find it helpful, or something. Once I'm done, I'm going to seal it up in a pipe, coat it in wax, and chuck it into the ravine. Maybe someday, someone will read this and try to put things together, if they're allowed to. I'd love to start at the beginning, but I'm honestly not sure when the world started to end. It could have been years and years before the final bits, or it could have all been at once. Everything was so grim. What was warmer air, cooler seas, too little gas, and too many people. Things could have been unraveling for ages before things bubbled up to the public eye. What I and others remember most was when the Disney Magic sank. It was then, I think, that most people started to think that things might be worse than they seemed. The Disney Magic was a big cruise ship, one of those liner jobs that tools around islands and stuff. One day, the news was all screaming about how it suddenly just went down when it was trying to put it into port. The weird thing about it was how there was no video of it for a long time. Some still pictures of it floating fine, but none of it actually going down. Then, somehow, a tape showed up, and the news started playing it. I have to imagine they didn't review it first. The ship was puffing along, strong and fast, little boats bobbing around it, looking like every vacation lover's dream. When suddenly it stopped. Stopped. Just a dead halt, like it had just slammed into a mountain. You could see people go lurching forward all over the deck. A bunch of junk fall off the sides. A real mess. It's all still for a few seconds. Then suddenly, there's this foaming behind the ship. Most people assumed it was the engine trying to fire up again. Then the arm came up. I'm not sure if it was actually an arm, but it was some kind of limb. It must have been 100 feet long at least. It reached up along the side of the boat and just ripped it open. Unzipped it, like a coat. And you could see all the people inside screaming and running. It was awful. Then you saw something lurch, a big, spiny shape pushing against that gap, shoving in. Then there was an explosion on its back, and the camera whipped up to show a couple of jets whizzing by. Then it ended. I remember just sitting there stunned, looking at the TV, barely noticing the president coming on to declare a state of emergency. I think it was 2 or 3 days later when the TV went under full government control. But it may have been a week. I'm not sure. Internet got clamped later. But soon all you could hear, read, or see was, "Remain calm. Everything is under control." The oddest thing was that life really didn't change much for a while. Bills still came, still had to work, go to school, all that. Just a little more scared faces, and a lot more weird talk. Pretty soon we were getting told that whole towns were being evacuated, that there was a plague, or a riot, or a terrorist bomb, or some other nightmare. My brother down south said that they got moved because of a huge wildfire. The weird thing was, he said, that the fire moved oddly. Seemed to shoot right for gas or brush, didn't travel evenly. That after a while, he swore he saw what looked like a 20-foot tall man of fire walking and eating everything. The call got dropped right after he said that. I haven't talked to him since. So things got worse, little by little. People kept being moved. And there was no real way to communicate with each other anymore that was really reliable. So it was hard to say just how bad things were. Still, word of mouth was still going strong. And it was creepy. Crazy stuff, really. Stuff about zombies in the north, killing frenzies in the east, a place near the ocean where the ground was alive and eating people, a cult screaming about the second coming and killing people to buy off God. I started pulling more and more away from people, just to get some ignorant peace of mind. Looking back, that probably saved my life. Finally, one day I woke up and there was blood on my window. It was outside and I could hear some insane stuff going down outside. Screaming, clanking, gunshots, and a smell like burning wires. I hid. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I left my fellow man to rot and hid inside for almost a full week. Long after the noise stopped, after the 5th day, electricity and gas gave out, along with the running water. When I finally got hard up for supplies, I poked my nose out and saw that the whole west side of the world was gone. Now, I don't know for sure if it was actually gone, but there's a cliff that starts 30 feet from the west of my house, and I cannot see the bottom of it. I also can't see the other side of the ravine, so for all intents and purposes, that part of the world is gone for me. The suburb I was in looked like a war zone. Blood and broken stuff everywhere. Houses carved up. No bodies, though. Which I still think was weird. I scrounged up some food and stuff from some of the houses, then went back home. I've been doing that for a while now. I'm not sure how long, really. Might have been years and years, or just a few months. It's hard to say. Sometimes the sun just sticks in one spot for what feels like days. Other times, these clouds roll in and you can't see 2 feet. There's things around, too. I run at the first noise, but I think they're about man-sized and they seem to like metal. Other little things scramble around in the rubble sometimes, so I try and keep clear. One time, a thing that looked like a pill bug, the size of a cat, crawled out and looked at me and screamed, "Stop!" in perfect English. I hid inside for days. There are also these big blimp things that float around sometimes. They have little bug legs on their underside, and they look kind of like maggots, but with eyes all over. They eat everything when they land. Most of the time they stay up high. One of these had just passed when I found the hurt guy. He was all ripped up and looked like one of those SWAT team guys you see on TV sometimes. But his combat suit thing was all ripped to hell, and I dragged him back home. And then we talked. He said that he had been hunting the blimp thing and had gotten attacked. He wouldn't say by what, but he looked like he was on his last legs. I fed him some canned beans and some water, and he seemed to come around a little. Asked me who I was, if I was alright and all that. He seemed kind of shocked when I said he was the first person I'd seen since the rest of the world vanished. He told me it wasn't gone, just relocated. I wouldn't say what that meant. I helped heal him up and kept asking who he was, but he wouldn't say. Finally, he said, screw it, that his orders were probably no good anymore anyway, and told me. He said he worked for a foundation or something, that they were like a combination jail and research center, and he said that he was one of the agents who went around trying to find strange stuff and keep it from hurting people. I said he was doing a hell of a job so far. He laughed pretty hard. He said something had happened, that a bunch of these things had gotten loose at the same time and caused this foundation place to lose control. He said it became a GH0 dead greenhouse scenario. I asked him what that meant, and he looked at me for a while before going on. He said that that's what they call a situation where everybody on Earth dies, but the Earth itself is still okay and can support life. I asked what did that matter if everybody's dead, and he smiled strangely. I asked him if anyone else on Earth was alive, and he said yes, but carefully spread out and contained. After that, I just sort of sat and digested things for a bit, and the man started stretching, checking his cuts. Started to pull his boots on when I asked what happens now. He said that they have to reboot things. Said that they have the technology to recreate almost anything, and that making people is actually pretty easy. Said that they would clean out and contain things, rebuild the broken cities and repopulate them. It would take a long, long time, but he said that they would eventually get things back to the way they were before. Even said they could recreate memories and stuff. I just sat kind of stunned and watched him as he just kept going along, getting dressed like this was all no big deal. I told him he was nuts, that there was no way people could just forget, that this could all just be swept away. He stopped and looked at me, smiled, and said, "Why not? It's been done before." I don't know if this man was crazy or not, but I think he was sane. As he was leaving, he said something about putting my house underwater. "Please don't let them brush me away. Don't let them hide us. Try and find more. I know there's got to be more people who tried to leave something behind. Don't let the world die in vain. Remember us." And that was the document recovered from the Marianas Trench. It was last edited in April 13th, 2020. So not too long ago, 484 days ago. And I guess the reason why the document was recovered from the Marianas Trench was because they flooded the earth. So that became his house became Marianas Trench. But anyway, I would like to thank those who are still here, and close it for the night. It has been 30 minutes of me telling these stories, and I think that SCP story is actually a good one to start with. It really opens it up, and I look forward to reading more. But that is it for me, and I have been VTuber Bea. I will see you next time. I will sort of just, you know, go